All right, I think we'll get started. So this is Peter Thomas, um, and I work as a distinguished engineer at Intuit. If you're interested in following me and the project Karate on Twitter, those are the handles at the bottom of the screen. And again, I welcome everyone to this webinar. It's going to be an hour. I would be taking questions at the end, and I think I'll just get straight into it. A little about myself. I've been at Intuit for 5 years, and Karate is an open source project that we started last year. It's been exactly a year, and it's doing rather well, and I'll talk more about it. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you if you do use it and get your feedback and so on. With that, let me get on to the outline and what the plan is for this session. I'm going to talk about how Karate helps you do API testing. And as most of you know, API testing is kind of a big deal nowadays, especially with microservices kind of being pervasive. And also because there's a view now that it's more efficient and better to test your, the system under test via the API instead of the UI, which is, more time consuming and more brittle. The interesting part is the test doubles that is somewhat new in Karate, and I think there'll be a lot of interest in that. We released Karate because we wanted early feedback, and it has actually evolved a lot since the day that we released it. There have been multiple releases and a lot of feedback. It's been used by the community. We hope to see the same happen on the test doubles front, and the latter half of this presentation would talk about what exactly it is, how you can use it, and how it can make testing and your development of microservices easier. And yes, we hope to have a time at the end for questions, and we'll see how it goes. You would be able to ask questions via the GoToWebinar, the console that you have, the UI that you have. You should be able to type your questions, and at the end, I would be reading through and answering them depending on how much time we have. While I do, have a lot of slides, I would do my best to show you demos, and if time permits, depending on questions, there could be demos that response to specific questions. So let's see. I'll be trying for that as far as possible. And in terms of expectations, Karate, because I know a lot of people who might be joining may be new to automation, may not be really programmers. And I think the good news is that Karate is, although it's based on Java, it doesn't require you to know Java that much. You can actually get up and running with Karate without even compiling any code, and it fits directly into your existing infrastructure. And I can talk more about that. For example, if you have Jenkins or Circle CI, it's going to fit right in, and you wouldn't have any issues integrating it into what you already have. So as I said, Karate is actually 1 year old. It's an Intuit project. We are very proud of the way that it has actually been adopted, and I can show you some examples. And if you need more, examples of people using it and comments and blog posts, there are links that I can. You would be able to find these links on the wiki page of the project GitHub website. Karate happens to be based on Cucumber. Some of you would have used it and are aware of it. It is pretty much a popular tool for test automation in a sense. And so one of the things that you would see in the examples and in the demos is that Karate actually inherits the BDD syntax. Most of you know the given, when, then pattern of expressing test cases. So you will see that. Very quickly, in terms of giving you an idea as to how Karate has picked up and is actually being used, and it's doing rather well, I would say, as an open source project. You can see some of the numbers, and we're very proud of the fact that it has actually got more than 580 stars in a short period, relatively, of about 1 year. And yes, there's a whole active Stack Overflow community. So in case you're worried or wondering about whether you can get support and whether the people are answering questions, I don't think you need to be worried about that at all. And yeah, there's many more like this slide, but this is just one of the data points that we have, where we saw people talk a lot of good things about karate, and this actually happened within 6 months of karate being released. We had Joe Colantonio, whom a lot of you would know. He's a prominent test evangelist, test automation evangelist. He actually rated karate in the top 5 of open source testing tools, which is a big deal. If you see on the right, you can see how new karate is, at least at that point of time. And you have JMeter, which is around ever since almost like Java has been around. So that's kind of a big deal. I won't spend too much of this on this slide. This is the marketing slide for karate. I think I'll get straight into the details in a moment. But of course, one thing that you can expect to see with karate is that it's easy, and it is, more importantly, much better to maintain because of how easy, concise, and readable the syntax is. So you can be the judge of that with the upcoming slides. So here's the hello world example that we use for karate. And you can immediately see this is not Java. This is not any programming language that you might be used to. Those of you who have used Cucumber can immediately pick out the given, when, then, and happening on the extreme left, the first word of each slide. But once you get into the details, you can notice JSON is native to the syntax. And this I find very interesting, because if you are a Java programmer or maybe even a C# programmer, you would know that trying to embed JSON into existing Java code is horrible. You have to put backslash, all those double quotes, escape characters, and all that. You don't see any of that here. And even better, this is lenient JSON. This is exactly how JavaScript developers are used to dealing with JSON. The name, the key here doesn't need to be within quotes, for example. You can see that this is a very intuitive DSL, and pay attention to the second word on each slide. You can see URL, request, method, status, and path. And you can straight away see that it makes sense to anyone who's worked with web services, especially REST web services. And that's one of the elegant things about karate, in my opinion. And here, this is probably one of the biggest deals in karate and in web service automation in general, is that you're going to get these horribly complicated payloads back from the server, and your job as an automation engineer is to actually assert and validate that this is as per expected. One of the great things about karate is that allows you to do it in one line, in one step. Of course, this is a hello world example. You will see complicated examples coming up. And at the same time, if you look at that ID hash not null in the middle, you are going to run into this, right? You're going to have dynamic random values come back from your server. You would have UUIDs, generator IDs, and timestamps. And the beauty of karate is that you can assert for your entire payload, except the parts of the payload that are random and you don't care about. And this is an example that you see before you. And the last thing, and again, one of the biggest pain points for anyone testing web services is that you're not testing one in isolation. You typically need to do a sequence. You need to call maybe an authentication web endpoint before using the data that came back and plugging it into the request of the next one. This is very easy to do in karate. As you can see, the ID that came back as a payload data from the previous response is able to be used easily in the next request. So yes, this hello world actually is an example of 2 calls being made to that URL. Okay, so a little diversion into Java and JSON, and this slide is probably more relevant for especially a lot of teams, and especially Intuit as an example. There's a lot of Java being used within Intuit for the services, first of all, the backend. And naturally, since Java is being used, Java is, or used to be, before karate came along, used to be the language of choice for testing web services. And if you see this, this is JSON. This is clean, elegant. It's a curly brace, and it's pure data. And an example of why JavaScript is popular. Obviously, you just put a curly brace, and you are working in pure data. Let's take a look at what this looks like on the Java side. And you can see Java programmers would be used to this. You have a POJO, you have all the getters and setters, and that's a lot of Java is not known to be the most concise of languages. And you can see we're still not yet done, because in order to actually finally arrive at the JSON that you see on the right, you do need to instantiate a class and we'll call the new keyword, and then set all the data before you actually reach a point where you are equal to the JSON on the right. Now, given this, what I'm showing you now, what I've built on the slide is actually a legitimate, a valid line of karate. This is a karate assertion, and you can see the match keyword is something that you need to get familiar with if you use a lot of karate. And it's doing something actually that's quite difficult to do in Java. When I show you the equivalent Java code, and why this is complex is because you're searching within an array, which is kittens, you see in the JSON. And the kittens is actually made up of other complex objects, which are itself, cat objects. I'm using cat as a domain model here. And if you look at the Java code, you can immediately, a lot of Java programmers would relate to this. You need to iterate over that collection. You need to check for nulls and then unpack values and then do all the equals comparison. Obviously, it's a lot easier with karate. And some Java programmers at this point would actually say, hey, if I implement equals and hash code, it's not too bad, right? And then I show them this example. Before that, this is just the enterprisey version of what I showed you previously on the Java code, because you need to write typically generic functions that can take any cat and any kitten. And then, again, I'm pretty sure I've made mistakes in this code. So I'll quickly move on to this example, which is you're running the similar kind of check, finding something within an array, whether it's contained, but you're running this very nice expression saying, where the value should be greater than 25. And yes, karate supports this. You can also notice the string here, because karate has this concept of fuzzy matches. You don't need to have an exact match all of the time. And this slide is an example of all the various fuzzy kind of matches that karate supports. And here are a few examples. By the way, pay special attention to that star that you see. This is something called JSON Path. If you are used to doing a lot of XML XPath, this is very similar. And think of it as being the way in which, given a JSON, you can actually run queries on the JSON like you do SQL over tables, if that makes sense. So karate is very powerful that, if you have this massive JSON, you can very easily slice and dice it, get only the data that you're interested in, and then run these kind of match comparisons. You have the contains keyword. You can iterate over an array with the each syntax that you see on this line. And you have regex, which is obviously very, very useful in some situations. And one of my favorites, and not many people use this, but it's good to know that this exists in karate. You will see here an example of actually defining a JavaScript function and using or reusing that function in a validation of JSON. Very powerful. Karate allows you to do this and more. And I can, there's comprehensive documentation that you can look through. And if you ask me specific questions, I'll be happy to get into the details with time. Karate has a concept of templating, as you see on the slide. You can see that hash, round bracket, where any variables in the context, and def keyword, by the way, is how you define variables. And karate supports a whole range of variables that you would expect for a tool like this. It has JSON and XML, as you would see in a moment. But this templating is very useful because you can still express data as pure, well-formed JSON. But at the same time, kind of compose JSON out of other very complicated JSONs if you want. And it's very flexible that way. This is one of my favorite examples. Not many people can use this, but it's good to know that this capability exists in karate. If you look at that dollar symbol at the bottom and what it's doing, it actually is a reference to the root of the document. So this is actually a very fancy assertion which says the Fahrenheit field should be a mathematical expression of the value of another field in the same JSON. And as you can imagine, this is pretty powerful. And there would be situations where you would really want to use something like this. A quick, I'll not spend too much on XML because I assume most of the audience or most people are interested in testing JSON nowadays. But surprise is, some of you would be surprised that Karate has first class support for XML exactly the same way that I was talking about the JSON capabilities. What surprised us, to be honest, is that a lot of people outside Intuit are using Karate for SOAP. And it strikes me as that there seems to be a gap in the industry for a free open source, decent alternative for testing SOAP web services. So Karate is right there. So in case you have XML in your environment, in your organization, I think you should take a serious look at Karate, especially the fact that you can do conversions between XML and JSON. And there are many possibilities, especially for teams. And we have had a couple of instances here. If you have an existing XML based system and you want to do a migration and do a kind of a check against the old data versus the new kind of, if you have something like that, Karate is actually a very good fit for those kind of situations. Yeah, this is a very busy slide, but this slide exists to kind of impress upon you that Karate has very powerful and capable assertions built in. And if you use another framework like, let's say, Rest Assured, you would have to mix in HamCrest, for example, which is used typically for doing these kind of array comparisons, contains, and deep equals, which is very difficult to do in Java, as I kind of already explained. So I won't go through all these things, but the point here is that you don't need to rely on something like HamCrest. It's all built into Karate. And if I just pick out one example from this list, which is very useful, it's this. If you see, your actual payload that's come back is an array of 2 objects at the top, and you only want to check, you're only interested in a subset of that JSON, which is the key with the value, the key with the name A, and that snippet at the bottom is all you need to do. So it's actually a very sophisticated assertion, if you ask, if you think about it, because you're doing a check whether an array called actual contains a partial object where you're only interested in whether it has the key value property A is equal to 1. And this is really useful. If you do this in HamCrest or Java, you'll be actually writing a lot of code. So which brings me to the comparison with Rest Assured, because I'm kind of preempting what I expect to be a very frequently asked question. How does Karate compare to Rest Assured? And I think it beats Rest Assured in a lot of areas. As I already mentioned, the HamCrest example, but Karate doesn't need to be compiled. You don't need hardcore Java programming skills to be able to work successfully with Karate. Karate is great at parallel execution, which is very important for web services, because all of us know web services typically take a lot of time, as compared to unit tests. So it's very easy in Karate. And one of the great things about Karate is parallel execution capability is that it doesn't depend on Maven or any fancy scripting that you need to do, or you don't need to get Jenkins into the picture to do parallel testing. It's all built into Karate. It just works, and a lot of projects are using this in the wild. We'll talk about data-driven testing in a moment. Environment switching, hold on to that. I have an example coming up. Again, um, there's a lot to be said about environment switching. And one thing which surprised me about Rest Assured is that once you have a JSON object, it's very difficult to update it, especially if you've taken an object that's come back from the server and you want to kind of tweak it a little bit, clobber it, and then resend it or something. Very difficult to do in Rest Assured. A piece of cake with Karate, if you ask me. And we'll talk more about the test doubles. For example, a lot of teams use Rest Assured in conjunction with Wiremark. Karate now has this capability where it actually replaces Wiremark, which is very interesting, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. Of course, the bottom of the slide has a side-by-side comparison, so you can the two or three things I would call out is on the left side. I'm sorry. On the left side, you see a lot of noise, quotation marks, semicolons, curly braces and whatnot. You don't see that on the right side. And one of my pet peeves with Rest Assured is that if you think about it, that when, get, then, that whole set of steps on the left, it's actually one gigantic line of Java code. And a typical problem is that if you right click in your IDE and say reformat code, it just becomes one line. It's kind of very irritating. One of the very frequently asked questions I've heard. So if you're interested, there's a link on the Karate documentation, which gives you a very comprehensive list. There's a very detailed document because if you are using rest assured, or if you want to, for example, convince stakeholders that it's worth taking a look at Karate, you can use this document. The URL is there on the right and should be easy to find if you just scan through the wiki or the documentation. Very quickly, I'll just skip through a couple of these animations and get to this part, which is addressing a common question, which is how do you do data-driven testing with Karate? Answer is simple. Karate kind of sits on top of Cucumber, which has this amazing and very intuitive way on the right to express tables or tabular data. And you can immediately see the difference and the comparison from the left side, which is actually using TestNG, and there's this famous data provider, which a lot of people swear by, which you don't need anymore if you use Karate, because again, data-driven testing is built in. And you can immediately see it's a whole forest of semicolons. I mean, not semicolons, curly braces and double quotes and all that. And one of the things I especially like on the right side is that the columns are clear. You can see race and stops. It's clear what each column is doing. Whereas on the left, it takes a little bit of head scratching to figure out what exactly the data columns mean and where they're supposed to go. Another example which you can look up, and it should be linked from the rest assured example, for example, is, in case it wasn't clear yet, because Karate has this unique way of expressing JSON inline, and of course you can use JSON from a file if you want it, which a lot of projects do, which makes things reusable. Because you don't need POJOs, you actually end up writing a far less lines of code. And this dramatic example, of course, due to the fact that you did not need any POJOs to express all your request and response objects, ended up, where the test dramatically reduced in terms of lines of code. So look this up if you want. It's out there, and it's something worth considering as to why you should be using, or rather you should not be using JSON, because it's actually, getting in the way, if you ask my opinion. So just one example of the capabilities of Karate is its ability to do environment switching. And if you think about this, this is actually something every project needs. You would typically have all these environments floating around in your organization. You will have your local environment in which you do your development. You would have QA, you would have E2E, and maybe pre-prod and whatnot. And the question is, okay, great. I know I have all these test cases. How do I easily switch all my URLs, for example? All the host names would change across the environments. This is very easy in Karate. And I'm also introducing on this slide one of the somewhat surprising features of Karate for those who are new to it, is that you need to do a little bit of JavaScript and very little. What you see on the slide is actually a pure JavaScript function, and the rule, or the what do you say, the bootstrap of Karate is very simple. On whenever a test starts, Karate would execute this snippet, which is expected on the class path. It's got a well-known name, karate-config.js, and this function is expected to return a JSON object. That's it, right? And what Karate is going to do is that every key in that JSON object will appear in every test as a variable. And once you get used to this, this is actually pretty powerful, simple, and I think you would appreciate it if you start comparing this with what you would do, let's say, with rest assured, or if you use a Java project. In case you're familiar with Java and you've used things like the HTTP client, whether it's Apache or Jersey, to write a test, you would need to manage some kind of property files where all your host names are stored, and you need to figure out how to switch that depending on what environment you use. A lot of projects use Maven and Maven profiles, and it gets really complex, right? You'll be struggling a lot of the time trying to make sure that this property file got copied to the right place, or these placeholders in your property files got replaced correctly, and so on. You don't have that confusion with Karate. And in fact, even better, I personally see this as a big advantage, is all your environment settings would be visible in this one file. You don't need to dive into multiple files. And one of the biggest mistakes projects make is that they add a new URL, they forget to add it in one of those properties files, and it causes problems. So how does this work? I'll give you one example. First, if you what I've built on the slide on the right-hand side is one of the karate example tests, just a snippet. It uses a variable called URL, and you can see the value of some URL base is injected automatically by default when karate starts the test. Okay, with this config. The question, how do you switch this? If you can see towards the bottom of the code on the left, you can see an environment called E2E, and all you need to do is just on the command line, and this is obviously very easy to do if you are, let's say, triggering your test from CI, Jenkins, or a batch job or whatever. You just need to set a Java system property called karate.env, and because this is pure JavaScript, you have all the flexibility of doing if-then conditions. Think of this another way, right? Rather than this dumb properties plain text file, you actually can do some pretty sophisticated logic, and this works beautifully for testing and test automation. And as a result, that URL that is pertaining to the E2E environment would be injected into the test. Just all you need to do is set that karate.env, which you see at the bottom of the slide. It's that simple. The number of steps that you need to go through as a developer to just add a new configurable property into your test is just actually 2 steps. Add it to your config.js on the left, and it's ready to use. You just start using it, and it's that simple. This is what a karate report looks like. As I said, you get these reports even if you run all your tests in parallel. And what I'm going to do in a couple of minutes is just do a quick set of demos. What I'm going to do for the remaining half an hour is I'm going to do demos of some of the key features of karate and how a test looks like in both Eclipse and IntelliJ. There would be questions as to, is there IDE support? I can probably answer some of that. And I think with that, let me flip to my IDE and do demos. Okay, so what you see in front of you is a karate test, and you can see this is IntelliJ. And actually, I'm going to flip to Eclipse for a moment. Let me zoom in case it's not clear. So you can immediately notice, because IntelliJ has built-in support for Cucumber, and because karate is based on Cucumber, things are great. You get syntax coloring, syntax correction to a certain extent. It's not perfect, but it is perfect for test automation of APIs, if you ask me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate. Let me first start a server. And remember, this is not a karate server or anything. This is just a demo server which I'm going to use for running tests. So this is a Spring Boot application. I'm just bringing it up on port 8080. It started, and here's the great thing about karate. Because of the built-in Cucumber support, I can actually right-click on this test and run it. And I think the takeaway for especially those who are not that familiar with Java or not programmers is that you can get up and running writing your first test in karate without needing to compile a single line of code. You just write a test like this, and you just run it from the IDE by just selecting it and running it. It's pretty simple, and I think that should give comfort to a lot of folks who are kind of new to test automation and aspire to get into test automation. Karate is actually a pretty good fit for those of you who are looking to do that. I'm going to do a demo of the parallel runner. So there is a small API in karate in which you can set up a parallel run. So I'm going to run this one. It happens to be a JUnit class. And there's a lot of documentation as to how you can actually run this. So it's actually running 5 threads in parallel. It's executed very fast, obviously, because it's a local Spring Boot server and all that. You'll get a nice report at the end saying, hey, how many threads, how efficient it was, and all that. And you actually get this report, which I'm just going to open, and it's all green. But what I'm going to demonstrate is that how easy it is to troubleshoot, because no one cares about green reports, right? The fun begins when you actually have a problem, and that's where you're going to spend most of your time, trying to troubleshoot a test that has gone wrong and all that. So let me make a test fail. So yeah, I'm just going to introduce a typo here. So you can see a match response assertion, and a use of, by the way, embedded expressions and all that. So I've made a typo, a spelling mistake here. Let's rerun this parallel test and see what happens. So it runs all the tests. It did find one failure, and it very helpfully kind of prints the failure at the end of the test so that it's easy. You don't need to keep scrolling through masses of logs, especially, which can get really tricky when you run a parallel test. And the best part is that if you now refresh this report, you clearly see which one failed. You can drill down. One of the nice things about the karate report, which I don't see too much of, alternatives that exist in the industry, is that you can see each payload request and response that went as part of the test, even if you run things in parallel. So this is really helpful. You see everything here, and obviously you see the error. And karate is very good at telling you, gives you all the information you need. It tries to be as helpful, tell you JSON path wise, which field. You can imagine that this gets really hard to do when you have very complicated JSON, and karate does do its best to give you, details as to what went wrong, where, and what was expected. So with that, I think I'm done with the first half of the presentation. If you have questions, do hold them or start. I mean, you can type them in at the end. We will certainly have 10 minutes. I think I'm going at a good pace. So I fully expect to have 10 minutes for questions. So, do ask your questions at the end. In terms of technology, um, this is what it looks like. And I've talked about a lot of the pieces, and I think a lot of you would have already picked up on the fact that karate is doing a fair amount of JavaScript, evaluation, and the secret or the answer to that question as to how is it able to do that is that piece in the middle, which is called nashorn. It's something that honestly blew my mind away when I realized it was there. This is a piece of technology that's baked into the Java JDK version 8 onwards. It is a fully featured JavaScript engine, and karate just delegates all the JavaScript expression, handling to that, and it works really well. As you can see, a lot of the JSON and JS support is based on this. You already know that karate handles JSON and XML and has these assertions, which is what this stuff is on the right. It's worth calling out that karate has this unique feature where it supports both Apache as well as Jersey as an HTTP client, right? And it's pluggable. And I think this is good because it's future proofing karate in a sense, because in the future, if you really wanted to create another client, you could contribute. It's just an extension point, that's very easy for you to contribute to. I would really like to call out that Mach servlet, Mach servlet, which is at the bottom left of the slide. I don't think many people use this, but I think it's an underappreciated capability of karate, and especially for those projects that may be, using WebSphere or WebLogic or some heavyweight application server. This Mach servlet actually gives you a way in which you can run your karate tests reusing the exact same test scripts, but not. You can run these tests without starting Tomcat or your app server, which you can imagine is very, very cool if you can pull it off. So I'll be really interested in people who would like to experiment with this and give me feedback, because it's there in production, or it's available in karate as of the last few versions, and I think it needs more love and awareness, right? So I'm going to build the slide a little bit because I'm now introducing the new feature of karate, which is the second half of this presentation all about. And this is where karate certainly becomes a very strong piece in your weaponry to test microservices. And I'll explain more as we get into the next slides. But karate now has a capability where it embeds neti, which some of you know is a very famous protocol implementation. It's a framework that allows you to implement any kind of protocol like HTTP or WebSockets or even binary protocols of your own custom choosing and all that. Amazing piece of technology. I'm so thankful that it's open source. And we built karate. We mixed karate with it, and now interestingly, and no one would have ever predicted this in the early days of karate. Karate is now taken a 180-degree turn in some sense, and it's not just a client, but it's also a server. Surprise! Some people may be surprised to know that karate now is almost in the app server business. It's equivalent to Tomcat or Node.js if you want to look at it that way. And these are very early days, and hopefully you'll get a sense of what to expect in the next few slides. And again, I'm really looking forward to people to try this out, contribute, and see how it can actually help you move faster in your projects and your use of microservices. So I'll just take a half a minute pause to maybe allow you to think through some of the questions. And as I said, we would take questions for the last 10 minutes, so do send in your questions. All right, so let's imagine, for the sake of this scenario, that you are a team who's responsible for building that blue box. You own a microservice. Unfortunately, as you would expect with microservices, you depend on this other microservice, which is the green box on the right. Let's not worry about the queuing and all that, but if you want to mix messaging and async flows, that's still very easy to do in karate, because one of the karate's selling points, which I probably haven't mentioned, I didn't highlight in the slides, is that karate not only allows you to interop with JavaScript, but you can mix any Java code you want. So if you have some existing code, if you want to write some Java helper utilities, the impedance mismatch or the friction between you trying to call Java and back again from karate is very less. It's practically zero. Another way to say that is that there's no limit to karate. If you can write it in Java, you can use it in karate, so you'll never hit a wall, which is very common when you use some other framework. So with that, back to this example. And since you are owning this blue box, you would, as a good citizen of microservices, you would be writing tests. The gray test could be karate or any kind of technology that you choose. And this is an integration test, because in order to test the blue box, the consumer, all the other systems in this picture have to be stood up. So the disadvantages are, as you can imagine, getting hold of all the systems, and maybe it's down, you don't own that, and so on. Now, one of the good things which not many projects do is to write what is called a consumer or a contract test, right? So you have what you're trying to do here is, because you don't own the green box, you need to be insulated, or you need a check to see that in case that goes away from the spec, you need to know immediately. So the way to do this is to run the CI job that keeps running only the calls that you're interested in as someone who's consuming that downstream provider, so to speak. And if this is green, it means okay, fine. You can run this, especially when both teams are kind of developing the service, which is quite common. Now, here's where we introduce the twist, or what we propose with karate is that we're going to look at how karate allows you to write doubles, or some people like to refer to it as mocks or stubs. So what if you could get this nice, beautiful mock that can stand in completely for the green box? Because and most of you would relate to this. the green box is unstable, it's probably flaky, it's slow, or maybe you don't even have a pre-prod environment for that, which surprisingly a lot of teams go through. So what if you had a mock? And many teams write mocks, but there are two risks with mocks. One is, where do you draw the line, right? If you write a mock, you're practically re-implementing, do you re-implement the entire big, the green box? That doesn't make sense, obviously. And, it might be, are you going to write so much code just to create a mock, which is not your job and all that? And the other big risk is that, what is the guarantee that the mock is actually equal to the real thing, right? So you have these two risks. So keep that in mind. Now, one way to address this risk is this box, which I've just introduced on the slide, which is you can, since you had a contract test, which we introduced on the second row, you should be able to take the contract test and run it again as the double. And what you achieve here is that you have, and this, by the way, is going to run lightning fast, because the double, as you will see, is all in memory. It's a fake. In fact, everything in this third row here is fake, which is interesting. But you get the point that if this is green, it means that the mock is usable as a proper, fully fledged stand-in, and your last row would work. And the implications are very interesting. So if you have a contract test, and the green box that I've just built on the slide is interesting, because this suddenly becomes a problem which is not a developer's problem, right? A very rude, a very blunt way of rephrasing this is that if the consumer contract test fails, it is a matter of the project managers or the PMO to go and fight it out. The developers can stay heads down and still focus on what they are trying or wanting to do. And if I build this slide at the bottom or the blue section, that's your dev team. And what should strike you here is that you're completely decoupled, right? You have no dependency on the green part at all. You can run this pipeline, but still have that safeguard that your mock, again, and we will talk about how you can do the mock, because that is the big question, right? Is it really possible for us to write a mock with less effort, but is as smart as the green box? Assuming that you can do that, this is a beautiful situation that you have on the slide, because you have no dependencies. This pipeline, you own it. You can run this in seconds, because the mock is something that's in most cases going to be in memory and close to you. You don't have a massive network hop and all that. So one common question that should come up now is, how does Karate compare to Wiremark? You've already seen some of the interesting aspects and implications of the way Karate works. And if I zoom into this, yes, you can already see the right side is Karate. It's a lot crisper, far easier to read, in my opinion. And if I zoom in, you can immediately see, right, a typical Wiremark test is the one above. I talked about all the double quotes and the concatenation and the semicolons and the the Java Fluent interface, kind of a little bit noisy in this case. And in the bottom, you see Karate, and you see a very elegant use of a UUID function mixed in, part of JavaScript, part of the JavaScript embedded expression, a goodness of Karate, which really makes things easy and fun, if you ask me. So the other question that you would have, which I'll try to address now, is that, wow, I mean, are you really able to write a smart mock? Are you able to simulate all these complex use cases that you may have? And I'll try to convince you on this slide. This is a actual working piece of code that is a Karate server-side mock implementation. You can use JavaScript from a file, and you don't need to, but this is great for reuse if you have some really complex business logic. Nothing prevents you from diving into JavaScript if you need to. I think this is the biggest deal about Karate, right? The fact that you can have, in this case, a JSON object. Think of a JSON object as a hash map. You can maintain this global variable that is the state, and you will see the next, a few parts of the slide would, use that state in a moment. whenever you have a server-side microservice, one of the biggest, things you need to solve for a developer or as a developer is that you have post, get. How do you differentiate? How you respond differently to a post and the URL? Karate has a very interesting and innovative way of just boiling it down to a JavaScript expression that you just need to use some built-in functions, and as long as that snippet that you see right now where the arrow is pointing, as long as that returns a boolean, it means that that section, which is the scenario, kind of stolen from Cucumber in a sense. So yeah, I know that people who know Cucumber and using this are probably wondering what the hell is going on. But on one level, I'm kind of digressing. Karate kind of reuses the Cucumber syntax purely for the advantages of it's a very clean syntax and it works really well in this case. But the main advantage is that you get IDE support. Moving on, this is again an example that most people won't need, but if you needed XML support, it's all there. I talked about the XPath. Here is how XPath works in a mock situation, which is interesting. You can even do some crazy things like convert XML to JSON, which you see here. And this is the important part. This is where, after handling a post request for XML, we took the JSON and stuffed it into that curly brace state global variable at the top of this file, so that it's now available if another request comes for getting it by that ID. And it works beautifully. By the way, this is an example of JSON path, which is so elegant because no matter how many values you have in that hash map that we kept talking about, if you want to get all of them, this is the JSON path to do it, and it just works. URI path matching, yes, it's a very common need in microservices of all kinds to be able to unpack path parameters from the URL and then use that in being able to get data back, kind of as business logic. It works beautifully. You can transform JSON to XML. You can respond with XML. Yes, again, reinforcing the fact that Karate has this very interesting and unique, support for both XML and JSON at the same time. And the last two, arrows show you how this is a smart mock, right? It's actually a mock that's almost like the real thing in a sense, where if you do a post with a cat and you get an ID back, if you now ask for a cat with the same ID, you will get the cat that you expected, which is pretty cool. And this is the last 5 minutes of demos before we get into questions. What I will do is I'll go to a directory, and I'm kind of at the same time, while I'm showing you the Karate mock capabilities, I'm also showing you that the mock, interestingly, is now available as a jar. In fact, you can see there are a few files, and this jar file, which is available now as a Karate standalone download, has everything baked into it, including the server support. And how do I start a server? I just need Java installed. I don't need even the JDK, just the JRE8. If I say Java minus jar, I can zoom in a little bit. Karate and minus M for mock, and mock.feature. Okay, I actually forgot to add the port. So yeah, there's a nice little help screen that would come up. 8080. Address already in use, because I had the other example working. So I'm going to stop that server for a minute. Okay, clear. And that's it. It started. And actually, I love the fact that this started in milliseconds, which is in some aspects one of the world's fastest app servers, at least in terms of startup time. Let's open the mock file, because you must be wondering what. I'll just open another tab here. Open the file system, and I'm going to open this file in Visual Studio again to show you the advantage of using Cucumber as a syntax, because a lot of IDEs have support. You can see syntax coloring and all happening. By the way, the mock is actually CORS compliant. If you are someone, we have found teams within Intuit who are actually now using Karate mocks for enabling the UI development teams to move in parallel while the service is being constructed. As you can imagine, this is one of the ultimate, goals of many teams, and karate actually is something you should seriously look at if you want, something like this possible, let's say, in your environment. Okay, so I'll not spend too much time on this. This example is available as part of the demo examples of karate. Again, karate's documentation is quite comprehensive. And by the way, there's this interesting catch-all block at the end, which I just want to call out, because you see how easy it is to actually implement a 404 if you really wanted to. Okay, so the mock server has started, which is here, and I'm actually going to open this HTML file, right? This is a very simple, HTML file. If I show you the source, it's nothing but using jQuery to, just do a post request to localhost cats, and it would just print out onto the HTML the result. So if I click this button, and maybe I'll just put this side by side so you can see the console also happening at the same time. If I say, like, hit create cat, it created, stuff happened on the UI, and you can see a request actually got handled on the server side. And there's another URL where you can actually view all the JSON. And let's create another cat, like Bob. And if I go and get cats, yes, there are now 2 cats in the system. So this is pretty cool. And I've actually given a flavor of how a web development team or a JavaScript development team is actually using your mock, which kind of hopefully sells the fact that this mock is a true mock. You can actually use this for development of all kinds. Of course, this example used the standalone jar. This is all available via Java API. You can import this as a Maven library. You can just spin up. It's got the capability to use a dynamic port, so you don't need to worry about ports being blocked. It will use a random port and all that. So it's pretty cool that way. A couple more things I want to call out is I can run a test from the command line. There happens to be a file which is an actual karate test, so I can even run that. So there is this offline capability that has just come into karate. I can say java -jar karate, this one, and I say -t cats dot feature, and it actually ran a test, right? And the server kind of responded with all that. The last thing I want to show is that there's actually a UI. So if I say -u, you can bring up this, swing, or JavaFX to be precise, UI. This is again built into the jar. I can run this entire test. And if people are worried about, I'm not going to sell this too much because this is still work in progress in a sense, but I'll show you one of the interesting capabilities this can do. If I reset this and rerun the test, it's going to fail here because I had introduced this typo. But here's the amazing part, and hopefully you're going to love this if you are been testing web services for a long time. I can now edit the script inline and replay only that step, and move on. And this is phenomenal because you can imagine, you can see what you did not do in this case. You did not have to go back to the start. Maybe in your case you had this elaborate authentication. You need to go through all those steps just to be able to fix a bug at the end of your test script. That is solved with this. So I'm really appealing to people to actually take a look at this, and we need help to actually round out and finish this UI, which is already there, and you can try it out. So I'm glad I was able to call this out. With that, I'm back to my presentation, and I have around 7 minutes for questions. I'll not spend too much time on the slide, but your takeaway is that pretty comprehensive support, including the mocks that have just come in. For example, can it handle file uploads? Does it handle SSL and certificates and proxies and all that? Yes, Karate is pretty good. It has evolved with a lot of feedback. A lot of people used it. It has really improved over the last 1 year. With that, yes, and don't forget, one of the best ways to keep track of the project is to use the Twitter feed, or you can follow us on Twitter. And with that, Yeah, I have 7 minutes, and we can go over time a little bit if needed. I am now going to take a little pause while I read through all the questions, and I'll be back, answering the questions. So stay tuned. Okay, quick question. The first question from Suma, who's kind of asked as an engineering student, what is the use of JSON over Java? I think I kind of touched upon that in the first slide. JSON is a very lightweight, way to express data, whereas Java kind of, involves you to write code and have objects and instantiate them and all that. One of the great things about JSON, it mixes very well with HTTP and HTML in a sense. So yes, it's just a way to pass data from one point A to another point B. And since it's plain text, it has some advantages that it's reusable, it's readable. I'm sorry. So that's about JSON. Yeah, someone Shiva Shankar said that he did not see the doc string in the Cucumber reports. I think the short answer, Shiva, is that probably you're in an old version. One of the new versions from version 0.6 on 0.7 onwards, you certainly have the inline Cucumber reports. There is some documentation that I would advise you to pay attention to actually do that. And I think I touched upon that in the demo. You do, in fact, let me do that. Let me just go to the Karate website and I'll show you where to find the instructions as to how you get those very nice looking reports that I just demoed. If you go to the Karate demo, there is a whole bunch of demos, by the way. So people who need advanced examples, for example, authentication and header management would be something you might be interested in. Yes, Karate is good at OAuth and setting headers and reusing headers for all your requests. It's very, very good at that. But if you scroll to the bottom of this demos page, it says, okay, this is how you can do the report. There's a couple of steps, very simple steps. You need to import one particular Java library, and then you're up and running with this report. So hopefully that answers your question, Shiva. Next question, Deepak Gopal says, are you saying Karate doesn't need TestNG? I'm absolutely saying that Karate does not need TestNG. Yes, you do not need, for example, the TestNG data provider annotation anymore. It's all built into Karate, looping, environment switching. It's a one-stop shop. You don't even need assertions from TestNG at all. It's all built into Karate. So yes. A question from Deepak again. Where can I find the demo example Karate repo that you used? Very simple. In fact, by the way, if you do a search for just Karate, you're bound to reach Karate because, even, but yeah, Karate API should land you straight at the Karate GitHub. In fact, one of the feedback I get, which I think is a good thing, I take it as a compliment, is that there is too much documentation. So I'll just scroll through this for a moment. And there's really a lot. This has taken a while to build, a lot of support from various folks, but I'm very happy to say that for someone who's new, who needs to onboard onto Karate very quickly, I think you would be happy with what you would see, and you can expect a fair, decent level of documentation. Puneet Bisht has said, this is amazing. What I'm thinking is that Karate has a capability of creating test data using API before running functional UI tests. We are kind of thinking about this. I am assuming the question means, can you actually generate automatically maybe a CRUD kind of test given, something like a spec? We're not there yet. I'm personally not, looking at, generation of test cases yet. I wanted mocks to be done, and I think they've just achieved that. A lot of people are now asking me for performance testing, so we're looking actively as to whether we can actually start integrating with something like Gatling, for example. So still very early days on that front. Okay, question from Sasa Dimitri. Is programming skills required? If yes, what level of skills from a scale of 1 to 10? So the short answer is, what I would say, very little level of skills. I would actually rate it as a 1 or 2 for programming skills. And if I repeat this example that I just showed you, right, you can actually try Karate, and this is a very new thing. So look out in the documentation for the Karate UI. But if I redo the last step, which I just demoed, you just need Java installed. You can open a test using this UI, and you can run a test using this UI. and it just works. And I didn't have to, compile or install Eclipse or anything. So hopefully that addresses to some extent the question. Yes, if you do know JavaScript, it is a bonus, because then you can really work with things like configuration, setting, and all easily, or environment switching. But I'm very confident in saying that you don't need programming skills. So that's my answer. Again, a question from Sasa Dimitri, which is, is it possible to test SOAP with karate? Is it as easy? Yes. Where can I get tutorials for karate learning? I'll repeat that, you should look at the demos of karate. And let me also show you that there is a specific demo for SOAP, because it's a very frequently asked question, to be honest. SOAP.feature. Yes, by the way, this is how easy to express XML in karate. And you just need to do this once, because it's very easy. For example, if you have header and body and all those pieces, you can reuse them very easily in karate. If I zoom into this last line, I'm reading XML from the file and using it in an assertion. And yeah, for those of you who are familiar with SOAP, hopefully this totally answers your question. Yes, you can use karate for testing SOAP, and it's very easy. If the request body is very complex, yes. Question from Bhupesh Pant. It's more, I think I'm interpreting this question to mean, if the request body is very complex, it's going to be hard to manage in your test case. So how do you do this? And there's a second part of the question, which is about how do you check against a DB? I'm going to get to that. The quick answer to the first part of the question is that, karate very easily allows you to read from a file. For example, this is a JSON file that's on the file system, and you can see, you already saw an XML example. This is an example of reading JSON from the file system. And the good news is that the same way that you read a file for a response, you can do the same for a request as well. So it's all good. Great. Glad you asked, Bhupesh, the question on, can you call a database as part of your test? And then before I forget, I should show you this example. It's again part of the demos. Look for dogs.feature. There's a little bit of text here that says, how do you make a JDBC call? And this is worth spending maybe a couple of minutes on. It starts out like a very normal looking karate test, but things get interesting here in the middle. This line is where in karate, it's actually using a Java class. This happens to be a Java class that I wrote, just for the sake of making a database call. And one of the great things about karate, and I advise you to look out for this, is that the way in which you pass data into Java and the way that you get back data from Java, like here you can see config is just JSON. We actually notice the use of the Java new operator, so full object orientation is there at your fingertips. We used JSON and we were able to get a Java object to, be instantiated. But the best part is this: if you design your Java object to be able to return JSON as part of some method that you invoke, if you design your Java object to be able to return a hash map, for example, the great thing about Nashorn, which I talked about, which is this JavaScript engine that behind the scene, is that the moment a JSON comes back into karate, the moment a hash map, comes back into karate, it becomes JSON, right? And guess what? Karate is one of the best things out there that can handle JSON. And what to rephrase, when I called a Java method called read rows, and I'm passing some SQL that actually went behind the scenes to some database, and it returned a list of hash maps. In this case, it became JSON, a JSON array. And so I'm able to use karate's assertions and match syntax, and it just works. So it's this brilliant mix, if you ask me, of Java and JavaScript and karate assertions, and it just works. So hopefully that answers your question as to, hey, can you call a database as part of your karate script? Yes, we have teams and this is probably important to call out, we have teams that actually mix Karate into Selenium tests, right? You have a WebDriver test, you need to set up some data before you start your UI test, or you need to validate in your database at the end of the UI test. People are doing that today if you search on the internet with Karate. Could you share the video recording of this webinar? Yes, Naveen has asked this question. It would be up shortly, so just stay tuned. I'm not exactly sure when, but I've been told that this would be available on YouTube. So it's going to be, you know, easily accessible and all that. So I think that is good news, and you should just stay tuned for that. All right. Question by Shekhar: can we convert existing rest assured project into Karate project? I wish. Unfortunately, not so simple. In fact, because rest assured is, you know, based on Java, and, you know, Java can be really complicated and all that. I don't think this is feasible. However, Shekhar, let me tell you this, right? One of the ways in which I see a lot of teams quickly move existing test cases to Karate, and, you know, someone already asked a question as to, can you use, you know, if your requests are very complex, you know, what do you do? The answer is that you can use files. So, Shekhar, all you need to do is, when you just run your existing test, just look at your logs, save your logs to the files, and you should be able to very quickly cut and paste all those JSON payloads straight away into a Karate test like this, and it would just work. We see a lot of teams doing it. To repeat, if you have your JSON payload somewhere, you just paste it into a Karate test. It's going to start working, and very quick way of creating your tests. Is there any integration of CI/CD pipeline? Yes. I think the short answer is that by default, when you use this report that I just showed you, right, these pretty reports behind the scenes, Karate is also outputting the JUnit format of the XML files, which is supported by all you know, popular leading CI tools like Jenkins, for example. I don't have a example here, but I used to have a slide that showed a Jenkins report. So the answer is a big yes. By default, you should get Karate to work with any CI, CD, or any CI tool. Examples like Jenkins, Circle CI, Semaphore, it's going to work. Why the name Karate? Great question, Puneet. It's simple. You know, I have a kind of particular interest in, you know, things Japanese. And another answer is that, you know, I did do a search when we started this project as to whether there was any other software called Karate. There happened to be none, so I just jumped on it, right? Another bit of trivia is that the Karate logo is based on, you know, an old video game which some of you may be familiar with, depending on how old you are in the industry and all that. But there used to be a game called Prince of Persia that maybe a lot of you would know. The author of that, his first game was called Karateka, and it was all about a, you know, very rudimentary graphics like this, you know, and all that. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. But short story is, you know, I just jumped on the name because there wasn't any other software called Karate, and I'm happy to actually see now that if you actually do a search for just Karate without API or Intuit or, you know, testing or anything, this project is now turning up in the top 2 pages at least of search results. So, you know, we're kind of redefining the word Karate. Apologies to all actual Karate practitioners, but yeah, what it's worth. Is this paid or freeware? The question by Jagadish. No, this is pretty much free. This is an open source project. The license is MIT, so, you know, that should address any concerns of whether this could become, you know, proprietary sooner and all that. Nope. This is pretty much free. There's a lot of what do you say, an open source project in every sense of the word. A lot of contributions. You can see contributions from outside Intuit. We're very happy to see a lot of people who have submitted pull requests. So it's pretty good that way. Does it support OAuth? Question by Shekhar. Answer is yes. Again, if you go to the Karate demo page, again, the short answer is that Karate supports any kind of header complexity that you have in your existing, you know, project. The second row in this demos example, I'll zoom in. You can see there is an OAuth 2 sample, which you should look at. It's actually running against a live site. If it is still up, I haven't checked for a while. But it's very simple. I mean, the short answer is that you can, by the way, this section is doing a form, a URL encoded form submit. which is what you typically need to do for sign-in scenarios. And after that, you get a token back, the response.access token. You put it in a variable, and you just start creating an authorization header with that token, and it just works. So by the way, it's a great question, because I was able to kind of give you a flavor as to one of the ways, and this is just one of the ways in which you can manage headers in Karate. There are many more options, like using a JavaScript function that executes before each request. But yes, header management is pretty simple and powerful in Karate. Great. I think we've come to the end of our time here. So I think I'm going to call it at this point. Thank you all for joining. And again, feel free to reach out to the project, submit issues, even use Stack Overflow to ask your questions. We are monitoring that. So that's one easy way for you to get your questions answered. Thanks again for your time, and looking forward to hearing from you and your feedback. Thank you.